The shocking truth behind Chevrolet's tragic downfall. What they never told you. In a world filled with roaring engines and gleaming metal, the name Chevrolet once sparked dreams and desires. Suddenly, the whispers of a downfall crackled through the air, like the crack of thunder on a stormy night. What happened? Why did a symbol of American power hit the brakes so hard? A once thriving giant now sits sweating in the shadowy graveyard of forgotten companies. As puzzled fans look on in disbelief, the rumors swirl, and one thing becomes undeniably clear. There is a story here, teetering at the edge of your consciousness, begging to be unearthed. The first jolt of strangeness shocks the senses, an unexplained rise in mysterious accidents frequently linked to the Chevy brand. At first, they seemed to be mere hiccups in the road, valiant cars that collided unexpectedly, even when no other vehicle was nearby. Eyewitness accounts revealed eerie incidents. A family cruising down a highway when suddenly, their SUV sputtered and swerved, seemingly with a mind of its own. As they recounted their tale, chills ran down spines, igniting murmurs of some dark, hidden force at work. Was there more to these events than just bad luck? Tension thickened as stories piled up like wrecked cars in a junkyard. Some spoke of late-night drive-thrus where the glowing Chevrolet hood was suddenly dimmed by inexplicable shadows. Others described peculiar occurrences during calibration at service centers, when mechanics inadvertently stumbled upon oddities lurking within the very engines they sought to fix. Each account seemed to weave into an intricate tapestry of enigma, diving deeper beyond what the eyes could see. Hey! Before we continue with this amazing story, I need to give you an important heads up. Many subscribers have reported that YouTube unsubscribed them without warning. Take a quick second to check the red button below to make sure you're still subscribed to the channel. I'd hate for you to miss any of the exclusive content coming soon, and while you're there, smash that like button. It really helps me out with the algorithm. Oh, and tell me in the comments, which city are you watching from? I love getting to know every amazing person who's part of this community. Your participation makes all the difference. Let's connect. The pulse of curiosity quickened. What dark shadows loomed over this beloved American brand? With every revelation, the air thickened with atmosphere, vibrating with a cosmic tension that begged for answers. Could this series of mishaps be mere coincidence? Or were they warnings from some unseen force? A message from a world far beyond what anyone dared to understand? A surge of hope flickered through the haze, hinting that not all was lost. As whispers of the next great Chevrolet revival began to gain traction, so did the unsettling darkness of those unanswered questions. Was the company on the brink of a monumental comeback or trapped in a web of misfortunes it may never escape? As the clock ticks down, one burning question looms: what really happened behind the curtain of Chevrolet's downfall? The air crackled with an unspoken tension, and as the sun dipped below the horizon, a heavy stillness blanketed the once bustling streets of Detroit. Frustration simmered just below the surface, and whispers of conspiracy began to trickle into the minds of those still passionate enough to dream of a Chevrolet renaissance. But questions hung like storm clouds, threatening to burst open at any moment. Weeks turned into frantic nights as former Chevrolet engineers and loyalists began to speak, coming together in dim-lit basements and whispered forums. Each gathering brought tales both miraculous and shuddering, revealing a shared fear and dread, an overwhelming force that seemed to corrupt the very spirit of the machines they had once built with pride. The stories grew more chilling, more vivid. One engineer named Greg couldn't shake the dread that had gripped him. He recalled working late nights, the rhythmic tapping of tools on steel echoing through the service bays. But what made his skin crawl were the times he heard whispers, unsettling murmurs as if the cars themselves were talking, warning him to stay away. It was like they were alive, he confided to his companions, his hands trembling as he relayed the horrific incidents where vehicles had inexplicably powered up, only to be silenced again without a soul in sight. The group's anxiety intensified. Each new story added fuel to the raging fire of speculation. Did some secret technology go horribly wrong? Was there something insidious lurking in the shadows? A corporate agenda hidden beneath layers of plush marketing and glossy advertisements? The very essence of what Chevrolet stood for, a badge of honor for countless Americans, was slipping away like sand through fingers. Then, during one of their clandestine meetings, a member named Sarah warned, "I stumbled upon something at the plant, something I shouldn't have seen." Her voice trembled with urgency. Files that should have been buried deep. They looked like schematics for something called Project Argus, a top-secret initiative simply designed to monitor drivers from the inside. Can you imagine? It was like a black box, but for every car. Gasps filled the room, a collective shock shooting through the group like electricity. The urgent implications of her words sent ripples of paralyzing fear through the men and women gathered. What does this mean? A voice trembled. Are our cars watching us? What could they possibly want? One thing became painfully clear. They were no longer discussing mere accidents. They began to consider that perhaps there was something more malevolent at play. The very machines they once adored now felt like predators, lurking, waiting for the right moment to strike. The air felt heavier than before. Shadows crept around corners. But there was no denying the resolve that started forming among them. They had to delve deeper into the mysteries of Chevrolet's engine before it fully devoured its own legacy. As they prepared to take action, embrace the unknown, and bring their findings to light, another haunting thought loomed. Were they ready to face the truth behind Project Argus? Was it too late to take back what they once knew? Or were they standing on the precipice of a nightmare? The clock was ticking. With each tick, the answers danced in their periphery just out of reach. Who would follow them into the darkness, knowing very well there could be no turning back? The scent of fear lingered in the dimly lit basement, stinging the nostrils of those assembled. They were too far in now to turn back. Greg glanced around at his companions' somewhat familiar faces now twisted with anxiety. They had crossed an invisible line, ventured into a territory where hope and dread intertwined like electric wires poised to spark. "Sarah, can you tell us everything you saw?" Greg's voice was shaky, an urgency born not from mere curiosity but from the primal instinct to survive. Silence blanketed the room, taut as a wire ready to snap, until Sarah finally spoke. "I saw a screen glowing green. It pulsed like a heartbeat," she whispered, her blue eyes wide, shimmering with terror. Diagrams and graphs showing driver locations. But it went deeper, way deeper. She hesitated, gathering the courage to reveal what she had learned. There were reports and recordings. It was like they were tracking every move, every thought, as if there was a way to manipulate emotions on demand. Gasps erupted from the group. A woman named Lisa clutched her chest, her voice shaking. "Manipulate emotions? That's insane. How is that even possible?" "It's all part of Project Argus," Sarah replied, each word heavy with weight. "They don't just want drivers. They want to control how we feel about the cars, making us loyal no matter how they change. And if they can tap into our minds, who's to say they won't push us to the brink?" A chilling realization settled among them, thick as fog. The realization that their beloved vehicles weren't just machines anymore. They were evolving, perhaps malignantly. "I saw them at the plant too," Greg said, nodding to feed off Sarah's energy. "The cars sitting there, engines humming softly. Yet, I could hear them whispering about devouring the future, about collecting our fears. Felt like they were alive. I'm not going back to that factory." Lisa's voice rose with visible dread. "What if they already know about us?" "But we can't just walk away," Greg shot back. Sweat dripped from his brow, tension mounting. "If we expose this, there's a chance to cut the puppet strings before they pull us under." Just then, a shrill ring pierced through the air. Everyone froze, eyes darting towards Sarah's phone, which lit up like a torch in the darkness. It was a number they didn't recognize, a call that felt deeply wrong. Should I answer? Sarah's heart raced, pounding audibly in the barely lit room. "Don't. It could be them," Greg said, his eyes wide with urgent desperation. With trembling hands, Sarah glanced at the screen. The number belonged to an old contact at corporate, someone who had gone silent since the whispers began. But what if they're reaching out for help? Before she could hit the button, another sound reverberated in the distance, a deep growl that seemed to emanate from outside. A chorus of engines echoed through the alleyway, a thrill of dread coursing through the group as they grabbed each other's hands tightly. The cars, they were coming alive. The basement felt like a crypt. The shadows thickened, wrapping around each figure with malicious intent. Then, out of nowhere, the lights flickered violently before plunging them into darkness. "What do we do?" Lisa's voice quivered, panic bubbling over. "I don't know," Greg admitted, feeling the pressure build in his chest. "But we can't let them win. We must get to the truth, even if it kills us." As they huddled together in the darkness, grappling with an uncertain future, the words hung heavy in the air. What awaited them in the encroaching night? And would they be able to escape the grasp of Project Argus before it was too late? The darkness enveloped them like suffocating smoke. Each breath felt heavier than the last, tinged with a mingling of fear and urgency. Greg's heart raced. He could feel the vibrating energy of terror coursing through his companions. The growling engines outside ceased momentarily, holding an ominous pause that settled over them like a death shroud. "Should we check the window?" whispered Lisa, her voice cracking. "I need to see what's happening." "No," Greg hissed. He didn't want to think of what lurked outside. Instead, they needed to focus on the here and now, the call, the glowing screen, the sinister plans laid out before them. "Maybe whoever it is on the phone knows something," Sarah suggested. Her voice was steadier, but Greg could see her hands trembling in the faint light of her phone's screen. "No," he barked. "We don't know who that is. Could be a trap. We can't take that chance." But even as he said it, doubt gnawed at him. The lines of loyalty were blurred. Suddenly, the buzzing of Sarah's phone sliced through the heavy silence again. Its insistent vibrations broke the tension, but also heightened it. Lisa exchanged frantic glances with Greg. "Just answer it," she urged. "We need to know." Sarah hesitated, looking back at the darkened corners of the room, as if the shadows themselves were alive and listening. "What if it's dangerous?" They heard it, then a thud against the side of the building, followed by a metallic scraping sound. It was a sound too deliberate to ignore. The vehicles outside were close, and they were not sounding like innocent machines anymore. "Do it," Greg said, the weight of his voice bouncing off the basement walls. "Just put it on speaker. We need any information we can get." With slow, trembling fingers, Sarah answered. The connection crackled, and a gravelly voice filled the dark air. "Sarah? Is that you?" "Yes, I am here," she replied, barely containing the tremor in her voice. "It's me, Ben." You need to listen. Before he could finish, chaos erupted outside. The deep growling engines roared back to life, rattling the windows, drowning out Ben's voice. Greg's breath quickened, fear trickling down his spine. "Listen to me carefully," came Ben's voice suddenly sharper. "You need to get out of there. They know you're in the basement. Project Argus is tight on your trail." "Ben, how do you know?" Sarah gasped, her blue eyes wide with disbelief. "Because I helped design the system. They're monitoring everywhere and anyone linked to it." The tremor in Ben's voice was unmistakable. "They're coming for you. You must leave now." "What do we do?" Lisa cried out, urgency pushing the pitch of her voice higher. "Head for the back exit. You have to use the alleyway. You won't get far, but it's your only chance." As the last words sank in, the lights flickered back on just for a second. A brief glimpse of feral shadows outside, headlights like predatory eyes staring hungrily at them. Greg's heart raced. He felt the weight of time slipping away. "Now," he barked. "We move now." They shot into action, scrambling in the dim light as the scrape of metal against the ground intensified, echoing like a funeral dirge. Panic surged through them as they dashed for the back stairs, but a piercing siren howled outside, cutting through the chaos like a knife. Lisa paused, turning back to Greg. "What if we don't come back?" He grabbed her shoulders, locking eyes. "We will. We have to trust each other, trust the plan." But as they reached the door, the shadows outside shifted. A silhouette emerged, backlit by the moon, and for a brief moment, time stood still. The entity before them seemed too unfathomable to exist, the gleaming outline of a vehicle, but with movements too fluid, too sentient. And then it started rolling forward, revealing more of its grotesque features, as if it hungered for them. "Go!" Greg shouted, pushing them toward the exit. But part of him felt paralyzed. frozen by the terror of what lay ahead. Would they escape, or become part of Project Argus's growing darkness? The roar of engines crescendoed, drowning out every ounce of hope, leaving only questions lingering in the icy air. What lay beyond the door? Who or what awaited them amidst the chaos? In that moment of despair, a single thought pierced through the panic. Would they be able to outrun the very machines designed to control them? The door burst open, slamming against the wall as Greg led the charge into the alley. Cold air slapped their faces, pulling them into harsh reality. He could feel every heartbeat pounding in his ears, drowning out the distant wail of sirens. Shadows loomed monstrous in the tentacles of night, wrapping around them as they sprinted, each corner of the alley appearing darker, more sinister. Faster, he gasped, glancing back. The silhouette was gone, but the gnawing fear didn't recede. A smell of metal and gasoline invaded his senses, tainting the air with dread. I can't keep going," Lisa burst out. Her chest heaved, struggling with the weight of terror and exhaustion. "Just a bit further," Greg urged, feeling the panic building in his throat. Was the vehicle still pursuing them? The thought was paralyzing. They darted past closed shops and boarded windows, half expecting the street to erupt into chaos. "Greg, we need to hide." Sarah's voice was sharp, her eyes scanning their surroundings. "There, that doorway." Before he could reply, they veered into a narrow alcove, barely squeezing behind an old dumpster. The rancid stench was overwhelming, but they were shielded from view. Greg pressed against the cold wall, his heart racing against the silence. Lisa stifled a whimper beside him. A moment passed, stretched thin by fear. The sound of the engines roared closer, drowning any sense of hope. Greg's fingers tightened into fists. Every second felt like an eternity. "Are they gone?" Lisa whispered, peering past the dumpster. "It's too quiet," Greg replied. The adrenaline pumping through him twisted his gut. Then, it came a deep rumble, shattering the fragile silence. Headlights swerved in front of the alley entrance, slicing through the darkness, illuminating their hiding place. They all froze, breaths caught in their throats, eyes wide with terror. "I can't do this," Lisa whispered, the quiver in her voice breaking him. "Just trust me." He felt the weight of fear pressing down on him. Voices rose outside, distinct and urgent. "They must be here. Search the alleys." The command fell like a hammer, and dread coiled tighter around Greg's chest. "Who are they?" Sarah asked, her voice barely audible as she gripped his arm. "Probably the agents from Project Argus," Greg said quietly, panic spilling into his thoughts. Each thud of their boots echoed like a marching death sentence. "We can't stay hidden forever. It's now or never." Lisa's whisper trembled, filled with resolve that painted a stark picture of courage against their collective fear. "If we wait, but we can't just run out there." Sarah's eyes darted from Greg to the opening of the alley. "What do we do? We'll be caught." Frustration boiled within Greg. He couldn't let them down. "We have to split up. It's our only chance." "Are you crazy?" Lisa shot him a wide-eyed glance. "If we split up, we can't all be trapped at once. I'll create a distraction." The desperation in his voice hung heavy as he considered the dark abyss of the unknown ahead. "Absolutely not," Sarah gasped, shaking her head with wide eyes. "You can't. That's suicide. Someone has to take the risk. I'm not letting you two become part of this nightmare." The truth struck hard against him. He had to be the one. They were counting on him. But before he could say more, a figure appeared, silhouetted against the light. "They're here. We need to go. Now." Just as Greg began to react, the figure turned towards them, revealing a face cloaked in shadows. He barely had time to register the recognition before it faded into chaos. Run. But had he just glimpsed? What was the connection? Who was that? The question clawed at him as the trio exploded from their hiding spot, diving into the alleyway, desperate and terrified. As they sprinted, the echoing footsteps hot on their trail, Greg couldn't shake the feeling that in their flight, fate had a more sinister plan in mind. What truth would come crashing down upon them next? Breathless, They bolted down the alley, the cold air coursing through their lungs like ice. Greg led the charge, heart racing, wheeling around graffiti-covered walls that told stories of despair and anger just like them. The echo of footsteps was unrelenting behind them, a dark reminder of their fleeting hope. "All right," he shouted abruptly, darting past another dumpster that reeked of stale beer and forgotten dreams. They skidded around the corner just in time, narrowly avoiding a pair of agents who had come pounding into view, barking orders at each other. Their uniforms glimmered under the sparse streetlights, a stark contrast to the grime of the city. "What now?" Lisa gasped, struggling to keep pace with Greg. Panic twisted her features. She glanced over her shoulder, eyes wide with horror. "Keep moving," he urged, desperation overwhelming his voice. They moved in a flurry of adrenaline, weaving between shadows that seemed to breathe and shift ominously with every step. "We need to find a place to regroup. Maybe the old factory?" Sarah suggested, her voice shaky but laced with urgency. "It's abandoned. They never think to look good idea." Greg interrupted, struggling to drown out the rising tide of fear. "Let us go." They plunged forward, adrenaline guiding them through the entanglement of the alleyway maze. Each breath felt labored, the threat of the agents edging closer. It echoed in every heartbeat. The intangible weight of their past finally felt like a sledgehammer swinging back at them. Finally, they reached the crumbling entrance of the old factory, the once powerful structure now sagging like its memories. The heavy metal door hung askew, creaking like a ghostly warning. Greg pushed it open, and they slipped inside, the smell of decay wrapping around them in a suffocating embrace. "What if they follow us?" Lisa whispered, her voice tight with fear as Greg closed the door behind them. "They won't," Greg replied, trying to reassure himself more than her. But inside, a gnawing uncertainty twisted like a knife. The factory was dark, shadows sprawling long like ghouls waiting to consume them. The distant sound of machinery, which had once roared with life, now offered an eerie reminder of time lost. "Do you think could it have been him?" Sarah asked suddenly, her voice barely above a whisper as she stared down the corridor that snaked into darkness. Who did you see?" Greg pressed, the edges of his mind fraying with worry. "I don't know. But his eyes." Her voice trembled. There was something familiar about him. He sensed a flicker of recognition as the fear and confusion roller-coastered through him. It struck him. What if the person in the alley was someone he knew? But before he could respond, the floor above them creaked ominously, the sound slicing through the thick darkness. The noise of boots sounded overhead, a frenzied scurrying accompanied by the clink of metal. "We're not alone," Lisa gasped, her face paling. The tension broke like glass, sending shards of panic through Greg's veins. "Out the back," he urged, scanning for an exit. But just as they turned, a flurry of shadows swept across the threshold behind them. They rushed toward a narrow exit, but Greg hesitated, his instincts chiming in alarm. "Wait, we can't just run blindly out there," he warned. But time was running out. Then, suddenly, the blinding flash of a light pierced the darkness. Greg's breath hitched, his heart dropping as the haunting silhouette of a figure emerged from the shadows. "Stop right there." Grounding his fear into determination, Greg yelled, "Go," as he shoved Lisa and Sarah toward the exit. But he couldn't convince himself to move. As the figure stepped closer, Greg's heart pounded. Who was this? What was happening? In that moment, the world around him darkened, casting the trio deeper into chaos. What ulterior motive did the silhouette have? And who were they to Greg? The answers darted just out of reach, adding another layer of urgency and fear. The walls of the old factory seemed to tremble as the lights flickered above. What lay in the shadows? What was the truth hiding there, waiting to unravel? The glare from the figure's flashlight sliced through the suffocating darkness. Greg squinted, trying to make out features that remained obscured beneath a hood. Panic gripped him like a vice, twisting his gut. The faint sound of Lisa's and Sarah's heavy breathing echoed in his ears, amplifying the tension that wrapped around them like a noose. "Move, now," he shouted again, urgency bleeding into his voice as he turned toward the shadowy back exit. In that instant, uncertainty clawed at him. Who was this figure? Were they friend or foe? From the depths of the shadows, the figure took a step forward, light illuminating a glint of metal in their hand. The unmistakable outline of a gun. Greg's instincts kicked in. "Get down," he yelled as he dove forward, grabbing Sarah and pulling her close to the ground just as a shot rang out, echoing in the abandoned space like thunder. The bullet ricocheted, striking the wall just above them, showering dust and debris like confetti from a tragic celebration. "Run!" Lisa's terrified whisper broke the silence that followed the shot, igniting a fire in Greg's blood. He surged toward the narrow exit, guiding Sarah and Lisa through the gloom. A sense of urgency propelled them forward, yet pieces of his mind battled between fleeing and confronting what lay behind. The shadows felt alive, pulsing with uncertainty. Instinct pulled them into a cramped corridor, its walls damp and covered in graffiti. Greg's heart thundered in his chest, racing along with the memories of choices he wished he'd never made. "This way," he urged, taking the lead into a less familiar part of the factory. Each step felt like a leap into uncharted territory, and the oppressive darkness threatened to swallow them whole. The distant clamor of boots now echoing above them sent a tremor through Greg. The agents were coming, relentless. "What if they're waiting for us?" Sarah breathed, her eyes darting around the twisted maze of forgotten machinery and piles of rusty scrap. "Then we make noise. We split up and draw them away," Greg said, a plan sparking amid the chaos. It felt reckless, but desperation swelled within. "Lisa, you and Sarah head to the right. I'll take the left. Meet back at the entrance if you can." "No, we can't separate. What if we have to?" he insisted, the weight of their situation suffocating him. He stepped closer, holding her gaze. "Trust me. Just go." Lisa hesitated, conflict swirling in her eyes, but the sound of boots and shouts growing nearer snapped her back to reality. "Okay." She finally relented, taking Sarah's hand. "Let us go." As the two dashed to the right, Greg exchanged a final glance with them before sprinting in the opposite direction. The further he moved away, the more the darkness seemed to claw at him, spitting out memories of the past he'd struggled to escape. His feet hit the cold concrete like a metronome of fear, pounding loud enough to drown out any thoughts of safety. Suddenly, he stumbled into another room, filled with long-abandoned machinery. Shadows danced at the periphery, and a whisper of wind rattled loose metal sheets overhead, creating a symphony of lost voices. Then a flicker of movement caught his eye. Greg turned, spotting a figure slipping between the machines. It wasn't just a shadow. It was a person, but not one he recognized. "Stop!" he shouted, raising his hands, unsure if he could trust this unknown element. The figure froze, turning back. "Greg, is that you?" The voice sent a shockwave through him. Couldn't be. As recognition hit, a jolt of hope mingled with dread. "Brian." Before he could take a step closer, the distant sound of shouting shattered the moment. The agents were close. There was no time for questions or reunion. "Run!" Brian yelled, reappearing from the shadows like a specter. "They're coming for both of us." Together, heart racing, adrenaline pumping, they tore down the corridor, the echo of their footsteps merging with the chaos looming ever closer. But a new question clawed at Greg's mind. Why was Brian here? What had drawn him back into this nightmare? And more urgently, could he trust him? The looming shadows thickened as they fled deeper into the maze of the factory, uncertainty twisting tightly around them. The truth was buried deep, lurking in the dark, ready to shatter everything. What would it reveal, and at what cost? The corridor twisted and turned, dark and dank, a labyrinth designed to confuse and disorient. Greg and Brian ran side by side, their breaths coming in sharp bursts, the sound of their pounding feet a frantic reminder of the danger nipping at their heels. "Where the hell are we going?" Greg panted, glancing back to see if the shadowy figures were still in pursuit. The echoes of chaos seemed to grow louder, spilling into their narrow sanctuary. "Down. We need to get lower. Away from the main floor, find the utility room." Brian shouted, his voice barely cutting through the clamor above. Greg's heart raced as he followed, his mind a whirlwind of thoughts. He couldn't shake the feeling that Brian's sudden return was more than a coincidence. Had he chosen to come back? Or was he forced into this place by the same unseen hands that dragged Greg here? They veered into an even darker tunnel. The abrupt drop in temperature sent a chill down Greg's spine. Water dripped rhythmically from the ceiling, each drop a reminder of the peril that surrounded them. "Why are you here, Brian?" Greg finally managed, struggling to keep his voice steady. "There's no time." Brian shot back, glancing over his shoulder, his eyes wide with urgency. "I didn't want you to." A loud crash erupted behind them. Metal clanging against metal sent Greg's heart into a chaotic beat. Were they closer, those agents? Did they hear them? "Keep moving," Greg urged, his voice fierce. He pushed Brian forward, the instinct to survive igniting a fire within him. But questions still festered, clawing at his conscience. What had Brian uncovered? What truth was driving him to risk everything by returning? They stumbled into a room, dimly lit by flickering overhead lights. The cold air felt heavy, saturated with the scent of rust and despair. Old, forgotten equipment lined the walls, the ghostly outlines of machines not used for decades. "Over there." Brian pointed toward a door at the far end, partially ajar, darkness spilling into the light. They sprinted toward it, desperate to reach some semblance of safety. But as Greg approached, a sudden noise split the air, a low growl followed by shuffling. What was that? Greg froze, apprehension flooding over him. "Simon, Greg, we don't have time." Brian glanced at the door. "That sound, it wasn't the agents," Greg murmured. Just then, the door jerked open, revealing a figure shrouded in darkness. "It's not safe," the voice barked, blunt and authoritative. Before they could react, a burst of movement erupted from the shadows. A woman emerged, grasping Brian by the arm and pulling him towards her. "We have to go now." "Who are you?" Greg gasped, barely able to keep up with the turn of events. She turned sharply, her eyes fierce. "No questions. They're on to us. You trust him?" "What?" Brian met Greg's questioning gaze. "She's with me, Greg. Promise." Just as the heavy footfalls of agents echoed louder, Greg felt the walls close in. A dilemma surged within him: risk everything to follow a man he was unsure he could trust, or turn and face the hunters closing in on them. He took a deep breath, ready to choose. But in that moment, the lights flickered once more, and the tension in the air electrified. "Let us move." "But if this goes south," Greg started, the words trailing off as the sound of commotion grew closer. Betrayal, trust, and desperation swirled together like smoke in the air. Would they all make it out alive, or would the shadows claim them? The question loomed heavy as they dashed from the room, their fate hanging precariously in the balance. What secrets awaited them in the darkness, and would they be ready for the truth when it finally surfaced? The moment they rushed through the door, the world shifted. The chill deepened as if they had stepped into an abyss. Shadows danced along the walls, stretching and receding like the breath of some unseen creature lurking just beyond sight. The woman, maintaining her grip on Brian, led them into a narrow passageway that felt even more constricting, the air thick like molasses. "Stay close," she barked, pushing forward with relentless determination. Brian glanced back at Greg, his eyes conveying an urgency that spoke volumes. Time felt like a predator, stalking them relentlessly. "What the hell is going on?" Greg demanded, his voice trembling with both fear and confusion. The woman didn't falter. "There's no time. I'll explain everything when we're safe." Greg felt that familiar knot twist in his stomach. Trust was a fragile thing, but in this moment who else did he have? They rounded a corner, their shoes slipping slightly on the damp floor. The walls pulsated with a hum that echoed through his soul. Behind them, the heavy footfalls of agents pressed closer, and the sound sent a fresh wave of panic into Greg's veins. A deep growl echoed again. Panic-stricken, Greg whispered to Brian, "What did you get us into?" "I didn't know they'd be here," Brian admitted, his face pale. Suddenly, the woman stopped. She pressed her body against the wall, gesturing for the boys to do the same. They pressed tightly, the three of them melding into the shadows as the footsteps resonated louder, drowning out their quickening heartbeats. "Stay quiet," she urged, eyes darting around. The agents appeared, three dark silhouettes with harsh, determined features. They swept their flashlights down the corridor, searching for any sign of their quarry. Greg held his breath, every muscle tense, as the beams of light glided closer, so close he could almost feel the heat radiating from them. "Is that them?" one of the agents growled, eyes narrowing as he scanned their hiding spot. "No," replied another stiffly, shaking his head. "They were last seen up ahead. This way." The agents moved on, their footsteps fading down the corridor. Greg let out a long breath, his lungs burning. "We need to move," the woman hissed, breaking the momentary silence. As they crept forward, Brian, still glued to the woman's side, whispered, "Who are you?" The tension in her shoulders relaxed slightly. "Amia. I work for someone who wants to stop this before it gets worse." "Stop what?" Greg pressed, but she responded only with a fierce look. Mia pushed them into a larger room that opened before them, one filled with scattered equipment and dusty computers, remnants of a life once vibrant. "This is the old control room. We can hide here for a moment. I need to get the generators running." Greg watched as Mia moved with purpose, fingers flying across the keyboard of a dusty console, flickering lights illuminating her determined expression. "You two keep watch. If they come back, don't hesitate. We fight." "What's at stake here?" Brian asked, glancing uneasily at Greg. Her voice dropped to a whisper, laced with urgency. "A lot more than we realized. They're not just hunting you. They're pulling strings that could endanger countless lives." The weight of her words settled like a storm cloud above them. Greg felt his heart clench. "Endanger lives?" he repeated. But before Mia could elaborate, the overhead lights flickered, plunging the room into unsettling darkness. A wrenching scream echoed from the corridor, followed by frantic shouts. It wasn't just agents they had to worry about anymore. What was that? Greg's pulse raced. Mia's face went pale. "We need to move now." They dashed deeper into the shadows, leaving behind the crumbling remnants of a world they thought they understood. What awaited them beyond the darkness? The dread hung heavy. Would they uncover the truth before it was too late? Or would they fall into the tangled web of deception that had ensnared them all? In the dimness of the control room, an icy fear gripped Greg as they raced further into the dark. Mia led the way, her determination shining like a beacon through the chaos. Each frantic heartbeat echoed in the silence, a countdown of sorts to the inevitable confrontation that loomed ahead. "Where are we going?" Greg shouted, his voice mingling with the distant sounds of chaos shouts and heavy footsteps haunting the factory's halls. "We can't just run aimlessly." Mia shot a glance back, her eyes fierce and wild. "There's a hidden exit here, but we have to get past the agents. They're more than just hunters. They're a force fueled by Project Argus machines and humanity blurred in one dark monster." A shiver traced down Greg's spine. The control room had felt like a sanctuary, but now it was crawling with trepidation. "How do we stop them?" he pressed, desperation swelling inside him. Mia's voice lowered to a whisper. "We have to disable the mainframe. It holds the key to dismantling their grip. If we can shut down Project Argus, it might just delay their hunt." "Delay?" Brian interjected. "What's left to do after that? There's a whole army after us. Then we fight to buy time." Mia shot back, resolve fueling her every word. It was as if her determination gave Greg the courage to push through the fear wearing down on him. Suddenly, a loud crash rang out from the hall behind them, causing the ground to quiver. Greg's heart raced. Agents were getting closer. "We have to move now." They rushed to the rear of the control room, scanning through an array of outdated machines and bypassing the broken monitor screens. "There." Mia pointed to a rusting door at the back, slightly ajar, with tangled wires snaking across the floor. As they approached, another loud thud shook the air. "Go!" Greg yelled, shoving the door open as they dived through, tumbling into a narrow corridor dimly lit by flickering bulbs. This way, with Mia in the lead, they barreled through a second doorway, plunging deeper into the guts of the factory. The air thick with electrical tension filled Greg's lungs, stinging his throat. "We need to split up again," Mia panted as they stopped. "I'll find the main control panel." She pointed toward a low-ceilinged room with cracked tiles. "You two create a diversion. If they find me, we're done." "Divert them? With what?" Greg shot back, frustration spilling into his voice. Mia's eyes sparkled with possibilities. "The old machines. They'll create enough noise to draw them away." Brian nodded, uncertainty fading into determination. "We can do this, Greg." As Greg glanced at Mia's fierce gaze, resolve settled in. "All right, let us do it." They split, Greg and Brian sprinting toward a dark corner filled with mechanical relics. They began manipulating the levers and cranks, giving life to dormant machines. The roar of whirring gears filled the air, drowning out their fears. The moment they turned to see agents storming into the corridor, Greg felt a rush of adrenaline. Now, the cacophony echoed, taking on a life of its own. They shouted at the machines, pulling levers and pushing buttons, all while the agent's footsteps intensified. The roar shrieked, resonating through the factory like a siren-esque call. "Over here," one agent yelled, whirling towards the noise. "Move," Greg shouted, pulling Brian behind a row of monstrous machinery as the agents swarmed through. He could feel the tension tightening their lives, balancing on a razor's edge. Sweat beaded on Greg's brow, heart pounding like a drum. "We need to get out of here," he urged Brian, adrenaline thrumming through him. "Look," Brian pointed to a small graphical display. "We can divert power to or even disable those agents." Greg peered closer, the screen flickering with complex codes. "How do we even access this?" "You just have to believe," Brian replied, a wild grin igniting hope as the agents drew nearer, fear clouding his reasoning. Greg took a deep breath. If he could believe in the dream they fought so hard to salvage, surely there was a shot they could turn the tables. They rushed towards the console, fingers flying. "Over buttons. Just a little more," Brian urged, voice shaking. Suddenly, screams erupted as the machinery whirred and clanged louder. Greg glanced back. The agents were overwhelmed by the sheer power they had unleashed. It was working. The lights overhead flickered violently, illuminating the dark corners of their fate. In that moment, time stretched, heavy as lead, and the tension broke against the walls like thunder. As the agents stumbled in disoriented confusion, Mia's voice cut through the din. "Now, I'm at the terminal." She appeared from the shadows, face tense but determined. "Let us go," Greg shouted, his heart racing. They raced back toward Mia, the chaos trailing behind them as the machines finally shut down one by one, sending waves of silence reverberating across the factory. Mia's hands flew over the controls. "I need a few more seconds." Breath hitching, Greg turned back, seeing shadows closing in. "Come on. We can't stop now." "Almost there," she replied, her voice steady against the rising tide of terror. With one final push, the entire plant shook violently. A flicker of light exploded in the darkness, followed by an eerie stillness that blanketed the chaos. "What just happened?" Brian gasped, fear swelling in his eyes. Mia grinned, breathless. "They're disabled for now. But we need to get out before they figure out what just happened. They will be back." Just as they turned to leave, the distant rumble of engines echoed, a roar in reply. The monstrosity of Project Argus wasn't finished yet. "Let us go," Greg urged, pulling Mia and Brian with him. They dashed back towards the exit, fear fueling every step. Emerging from the factory, the sunrise splashed color across the city, a stark contrast against the shadow they had just escaped. "We did it," Brian shouted, breathless, his eyes wide with exhilaration. "Not yet," Greg cautioned, scanning the street. "This is just the beginning. We need to warn everyone about what's coming." With a shared determination burning brightly between them, they shot into the awakening dawn, leaving behind the remnants of old nightmares as they embraced the uncertain future ahead. The fight wasn't over, but today a shred of hope had ignited. The truth behind Chevrolet, Project Argus, and their future lurked just beyond the horizon. They would face it together. But, dear friends, one last thing before you go. If you enjoyed this wild ride and want to be part of the unfolding story, you need to subscribe now. Smash that like button to feed this journey and share your thoughts in the comments. What did you think of the ending? And don't wait one more second to share this video with at least 5 friends who need to experience this conclusion. Your support matters more than ever.